Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Innovating Out Loud. I'm not going to talk much at all today. That's not true. I'm not going to talk too much right now because I really want our guest, Angus Fletcher, to introduce himself because he does so many cool things. I am anxious to hear what he says. And then we're going to talk about innovation as it started. And if you followed the posts online, you know that it had a much more interesting start than what we talk about today. And just a reminder that there's Q&A. So if you want to enter something in, Terry is on the line. She'll be texting them over to me. So go ahead and as questions come up, just put them in the chat. And with that, I give you Angus Fletcher.
Well, first of all, Joanne, it's great to see you. It's great to see everybody online. It's a big honor to be here. I was super excited when you contacted me and said that you wanted to, or were willing to talk about heresy and innovation, which we'll get onto in a second. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm a professor at Ohio State. I'm in the Department of English, but I have like a kind of a weird background, which goes back through neuroscience and neurophysiology. And basically, I'm just interested in all the parts of your brain that don't think like a computer. So I'm interested in imagination and common sense and all that kind of stuff. And I think the starting point for our discussion is, Joanne, you and I were talking about how we're both, big fans of innovation. Who is not a fan of innovation in the modern world? It seems to be like everywhere you see the word innovation, it's a big buzzword. And you and I were also lamenting the fact that it's no longer edgy or interesting as a word. That it's become really banal. Everybody says that they want to innovate all the time. Most innovation is not really particularly interesting or new or fundamental. And we were sort of chatting about like how this happened. And so I was invited by you to tell the true story of the history of innovation. So I'll maybe start out by telling a little bit of that history, and then we
Please
can maybe
do.
maybe get back to the present. So what most people don't know is that innovation literally used to be a heresy. It was condemned in the Middle Ages by the Christian church. And the reason for this is pretty obvious. God had made the world perfect. There was not the need to do anything new. And in fact, if you did anything new, there was a problem. God did not want you to do new things. Who did new things? Lucifer. Lucifer did new things, not good. And of course, most famously of all, Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve, she was instructed specifically, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. And what did she do? She did something that no one else had ever done before. She bit from the fruit, the forbidden fruit. Her mind was expanded. And for that, she was cast out of Eden. And so, for really the entire early history of the church, innovation was literally the most insulting and sort of terrifying thing you could say about somebody. To be an innovator, it was equivalent to being excommunicated. And this came to the fore in the early 16th century because a young Italian by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli discovered the word innovation and decided that he liked it, and decided, in fact, that he wanted to promote innovation and celebrate innovation because he thought innovation was the future. He thought that the future came from people doing new things. And for anyone who's ever heard the term Machiavelli, you might have known he did not get along well with the church. He was excommunicated and condemned. And from that point on, the word innovation started to assume this kind of like underground life where rebels and heretics started to own it and appropriate it. And there were these whispers about, they're an innovator, they're an innovator. And for the first time in history in the 16th century, innovation became good. And this led to another person, not in Italy, but in England. His name was Francis Bacon,
Ah,
founder of modern science.
yeah.
And, he wrote a bunch of essays. And in these essays, he was very careful because he read a lot of Machiavelli, but you couldn't admit it in those days. You read Machiavelli, it was dangerous. So he read a lot of, he would write in his essays, this guy Machiavelli is a total lunatic. Everything he says is bonkers. But, this idea of innovation, I think it might have something to it. And that led Francis Bacon to write this incredible book called The New Atlantis.
No.
And the New Atlantis is kind of, maybe the sort of, it's maybe you could call it an early version of sci-fi, But basically, the idea is that there's this island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's filled with these like techno-futurists who are just inventing all these amazing technologies. They literally invent television. They invent, cancer drugs. They invent all these amazing things. And at the same time as they're inventing all these kinds of spectacular new technological marvels, they're also exploring nature. So they get monks and they send them to the bottom of mine shafts and they put them at the top of mountains so they can observe everything. And it was this idea that there's all this new knowledge out there. There's all this stuff to be discovered. And so that was the kind of the turning point when Bacon started to revive the idea of innovation. He, of course, got thrown out by his king and he died his life in obscurity and ignominy, and so did not have a happy end. But the idea then gets picked up by the Americans, Thomas Jefferson, folks like that, and it kind of becomes baked into the foundation of democracy and then the Industrial Revolution. But the point of all this is to say that innovation was recognized at the beginning as being really dangerous. It was
Yeah.
about challenging the establishment. It was being against the status quo. And the bizarre thing that's happened in the modern world is that somehow innovation has been appropriated by the status quo. So it's come to
Yeah.
seem the norm.
Yeah. And when you suggested this topic, my immediate response was, yeah, everybody says they want innovation, but then when you show up and do it, you still get excommunicated. Like you're a heretic right up until you're a hero, right? They don't want to go on the journey with you. And I am using a global they. It's the people in positions of power and who rely on the status quo resist, resist, resist. And then somebody shows that no, this new way is the better way. And then they either the power people either get excommunicated or they come along, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so the question is like, what makes a heretic? Why are we so opposed to them? I mean, obviously, you can see why the status quo would be opposed to a heretic, because on some level, if you're kind of a fat cat and you've got kind of your good deal cooking, you don't want somebody coming along and getting in there. But most of us, I think, agree that the world could be working better.
Yeah.
And I think most of us would be excited at the idea of genuinely new things. And I think many of us feel really frustrated by the fact that when we look around the modern world, we see a lot of things telling us that they're new, but they really seem pretty familiar. And there's a lot of kind of recycled, rebranded stuff, but like, where's like the deep change? And so I think, I mean, I think a lot of folks have this question of like, well, how can we have maybe a few more heretics, or how could I even become a heretic, or what would that look like? How can I be a change maker for real?
I kind of wish more people wanted to be a rebel or a heretic. And I think in their daydreams they do. But one of the biggest problems or obstacles we have is people's own resistance to be the outsider.
Yeah.
Dean and I talk about this all the time with our book, and there's three books to mention today. Angus has two wonderful books that I love, Wonderworks and Primal Intelligence. He has a third that I have not read. I fully confess. It's called Story Thinking. And then our book, The Insider's Guide to Innovation at Microsoft. And when we were talking to people about our book, we got a whole lot of, well, I'm not an innovator. And I'm like, you're a human. So you are. It's just been squashed out of you. But then, even if you get them to accept that it's human nature to innovate, they're like, well, I don't have permission. And it's like, go back to Eve. She didn't have permission. So, one of the questions it came up when you mentioned Eve was downfall of man or invention of human agency. Which was it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But that emotional response of I don't want to be like my boss didn't tell me I could, so I'm not going to.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're never going to get permission to be an innovator, and you're never going to get permission to be a heretic. So if you're waiting for permission, it's over. But I mean, if you think about what we generally think of as being sort of the foundational moment of innovation of the last, 30, 40 years in modern industry, we usually think of it as being Steve Jobs. And we
Yeah.
usually think of it being kind of the launching of Apple computers. And if you look at almost any Apple computer, it will have an apple on it with a bite taken out of it. Who took the bite out of the apple? It's Eve. And so that's telling you something about the fact that there's this real lineage there from Eve forward to people like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, I mean, people always say the same thing about Steve Jobs. They'll say he was brilliant and I don't like him. He was a bad person, And this is kind of the thing that happens when you are a heretic is you rub people the wrong way. And a lot of times the people who succeed at being heretics have a certain kind of antisocial streak about them. It's almost like it's easier for them because they don't care that much about what people think. And so they're a little more comfortable, kind of being a jerk, I guess would be a way to say it. But I think for most of us, particularly anyone who's been in a company for a few years, you start to develop an emotional dependence
Mm,
on the company and its approval of you. And you get pulled in and you start evaluating your own sense of worth based on the feedback that you're getting and based on how you're kind of the steps that you're kind of climbing and ascending and your salary and all the other kinds of performance metrics that you're being given. And
yeah.
so really, in order to be a heretic, you have to start to disentangle your self-worth from the institution that you're a part of. And you instead have to attach your self-worth to your mission. Like, what
Yeah.
are you actually here to do? You're not here to keep your job. Your job isn't to keep your job. Your job is to do something. What is that something that you're trying to do?
Yeah. That is, you know, in my experience, in the case studies that I've read about and the ones we created, air cover is one of the primary ingredients to success because it eliminates that, oh, I'm going to lose my job if I do this, right? But it's really hard to get air cover in an organization. It's not always your boss that's going to give it to you. Sometimes you got to like go outside the chain of command and go find a friend that has power and influence and but in every success story that we found, either the person themselves had air cover. So Steve Jobs led Apple beautifully, even though he was a jerk, because he demanded excellence. He demanded intuitive design and beauty and all of these things right from the top, right? And then people like me who have never been at the top of a big organization, I've always just tried to seek out my champion that I will provide air cover for the people behind me, but I need somebody to provide air cover for me. Like it's got to stack. And if it doesn't, there's only so far you can go before you've taken so many arrows that you just die. Like that's how I always describe it. Like if if you're far enough ahead of everybody else, you should have a few arrows in your back. And if
Yeah,
you don't, you will.
yeah, yeah. No, and a big part of, your effectiveness at places like Microsoft or whatever was your willingness to be that person who took the punishment. And this is one of the things about a heretic is a heretic has to be willing to sacrifice themselves for the mission.
Yeah.
And this requires a kind of slightly different psychology than a lot of what we're taught in the American workforce. The American workforce, we're taught if you're doing your job, you get rewarded for it. Whereas the
Yeah.
heretic is like, actually, when I do my job, I'm punished for it. But that shows that it's an important job because,
It's the only way change happens, right? That quote we tried to remember and I can't remember it verbatim, but it's like only the unreasonable person bends the world to their vision. Um and I feel like there's safety checks, right? Like if you're bending the world in a way that most of the world doesn't want to go, you're not going to succeed. So you can be a heretic and you're going to live in the desert with your 12 followers and you're done, right? But if you're if where you're headed resonates with people, then they will come along eventually. Like this is the whole early adopter, fast follower, everybody else curve. There's got to be people willing to be the first, and then a few people willing to follow that person, right? And if without that, none of it changes. At least none of it changes outside the norms of nature. just evolving, right? Like random mutation and, you know, we lose our gills and gain lungs kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I mean, part of the tension that exists in a company is a company is there to make money, and you make money by doing two contradictory things. You make money by innovating and by optimizing.
Yeah.
And innovation and optimization are intention because innovation creates the new product, and the new product is always something that nobody ever wants to use because it's usually weird. There's not an obvious place in the market for it. It's ahead of its time. And then what optimization does is it takes that innovation and figures out how to refine it through these iterative steps until you
Yeah.
get the iPhone or you get something. And then you have like this kind of sweet moments in the cycle where you're selling all of these products and you're optimizing, and no one wants to get in the way of the machine. And the problem is that eventually that optimization is going to run dry because you're going to have saturated the market, your competitors are going to come in, yada yada yada. Everybody knows all this kind of stuff. And so you want to ride the optimization train for a while, but then you've got to somehow get back on the innovation and do that. And so these two things are constantly struggling for the soul of every company.
Yeah.
And, the optimization in a healthy company is short-term profit and innovation is long-term viability. And so in a good company, you're going to have a team that realizes you got to kind of do both.
Yeah.
The challenge is the optimizers are almost always the ones who get rewarded within the company structure
Yeah.
because they're the ones who are generating the money now. And this means that almost inevitably, the innovators are the people who are driven by a sense of passion, belief, caring, something other than material sort of wealth, like
Yeah.
crazy things, human qualities. And those are the kinds of gangs of like mavericks, the artists, the creatives who sort of end up in the innovation space. And managing that is a real gift. And it seems like, you have a long history of doing that, which is something I do not have. And I'd just be curious, like, because the thing about creatives is they've all got their own innovation that they're working on. We know that
Hmm.
most innovations don't actually work,
Hmm.
in the long run. We know there's a lot of risk involved because, I mean, with an innovation, you're trying to guess the future essentially.
Yeah.
And so you've got to get a lot of them to find one that actually meets the moment effectively. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do if you've got like four or five heretics? Because it's not like you've got one heretic and everybody's following them. It's like you've got, I mean, anytime you've got a few heretics, they're all arguing with each other about the appropriate way to like interpret, Genesis or whatever.
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I've been in a group of heretics before. We actually called ourselves Entrepreneurs Anonymous, and we would we would get together for drinks once a month and go around and be like, "Hi, I'm Joanne. I've been off the paycheck for 6 months, and this is what I'm creating." And it was our way to kind of test our crazy ideas against reality
Mhm.
with other crazy people. And we're like, if we can't get the other nutters to see what we see, we probably won't get the normals, right? And then we could help each other, and people like, oh, that's kind of like what I'm doing, but yours is further along. I'm going to help you. So you do find your clan eventually. Um, I found it much harder in big companies, honestly. Uh, the book, when I wrote the book with Dean, I got to spread out and find them in every nook and cranny of Microsoft. And there were many, but still like a fraction of the overall population of the company, right? Like we interviewed 40 people, it's a company of 200,000. And we went back in history to pull people forward. So, but they all like even at Microsoft, a whole bunch of these heretics back in the bomber Gates days when it was command and control from the top. Like you're not paid to think, you're paid to execute what we thought of.
Yeah.
They got together over beers. It seems to always involve beer. And a whole group of them just started experimenting together. And then somebody came into the company, found out about their little group, championed it for a while, then they left and the group went back to being underground, and it kept going like into formal existence and back to the underground. But eventually, when Satya took over, he learned about it and it became the garage. And the Microsoft Garage is kind of like the innovation hub where everybody learns to innovate. They go through hackathon and there's training and there's method, which is interesting. Um, but it has churned out several dozen commercial enterprises that would not exist otherwise.
That's fascinating. So Microsoft has basically figured out a way to kind of like capture some of these kind of ideas and I guess like pivot its own strategy I mean, is there like a favorite thing that has come out of the garage that you really like?
Most of it is, I hate that it had to go through this to be in the world, but many of the projects have to do with accessibility. So it actually led to a really cool thing. Remember back in the day when computers were green and orange?
Yes,
Like
I do.
horrible. You couldn't read for more than like 10 minutes and then you sent it to your dot matrix and printed it out.
It's not
Well,
metric.
right. So
Or the
the
Daisy wheel, even older. The Daisy
oh
wheel,
wow,
the Daisy
yeah.
wheel.
That predates
Uh,
me, I think.
yeah.
Well, the group a group formed in Microsoft that learned everything there was to learn about typesetting. They went over to Scotland and Ireland and the UK and learned from the actual metal press letter creators and everything. And then they used all of that plus they did all of this neurological study on how our eyes work to help create what is clear type and true fonts. So it's the breakthrough that led to us all living on our devices today, which I admit is a bad thing. But it also, we would still be printing out everything to read it if we hadn't figured out this technology of using partial overlapping pixels on the screen to approximate clear letters. And our brain and our eye does the rest of the work. It sees, 85% of a letter and it fills in the rest.
Oh.
And it's fascinating, but that went through this cycle of somebody wanted it to happen and then they left the company. So the group took it to hackathon. They hacked on it for a bit, jumped it forward. They got a new champion that wanted to bring it to market and then that champion left. That happens a lot, by the way. The people at the top leave a lot. And so it went back and forth again between like an official project of the font team to a side gig of figuring out screen readers and how to put different market marks in place for dyslexia and things like that so that anybody could read on a screen.
Now, this whole time they were struggling, did they feel in their hearts that it was going to happen eventually? I mean, in other words, was there this general sense that it's going to happen eventually? I mean, there wasn't like a sense of despair. There was more a sense of just like, we've got to keep going.
Yeah, yeah. One of the people that was on the team is Greg Hitchcock, and he is like the 10th longest serving Microsoftie in the company. He just celebrated 40 years, and he was a map maker, I believe, when he came out of college and just landed in this by chance in the early days of Microsoft. And so he was young enough and he was in the company early enough in the scrappy, less than 50 people age or 100 people time of Microsoft that he's like, it all comes around. I'll wait it out and I'll keep working on it and my team will keep working on it. And yeah, you learn he learned a particular type of resilience of being able to go underground in the company long enough for it to come back up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating when you look in the minds of heretics is that they believe that it's already happened.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of way in which their mind actually leaps time. and they almost feel like they're in contact with eternity. And if you spend enough time talking with a heretic, they will, they've visualized and seen the change that they're advocating for so strongly that in moments they feel like they're living there. They've just got to get the present to catch up with kind
Yeah.
of where they are. And that's part of what gives them this incredible drive, this incredible tenacity, just this sense of like, I mean, there's a sort of many times when I talk to someone who I would consider a heretic, there's a sort of weird mix of like patience and irritation, I would say, about them. So, if you catch them in a certain moment, they're very irritated because,
Yep.
like, why is this taking so long? But on the other hand, they also have this weird serenity, like I'm already there. And this is kind of, I think, how you can start to identify yourself if you really are a heretic, if you
Mm.
actually feel on some level that you've seen the future, and it's not something that you're trying to make or create even, but it's already there. And really, all you're trying to do is shepherd everybody else there to see it. That sort of is one of the sort of like fascinating, like weird psychological. It's sort of the difference between, a heretic and someone who's kind of like, a narcissist or someone who always has to be right. It's like it's my idea. No, that's a heretic isn't like it's my idea. A heretic's like, no, it's the truth. It's the
Yeah.
truth. Like, and like, I don't care if I get extinguished totally and I'm never remembered by history.
Yeah.
But like, this is the truth, and we've got to realize it.
That's so I make my living in innovation. I've done this for 26 years and counting, where I try to find a problem that needs solving. I try to figure out what that future state is, and then I make it come to be. And usually how I help my team with it is we're already on top of the mountain holding the flag. How do we get the flag? And I
Yes.
work backwards, right? But
Yes.
I've shared before that my brain, I just compress complexity. I'm just like A, B, clearly, right? And then B, I kind of put it out of I put it in my peripheral. If I look straight at it, it can get overwhelming. So I kind of put it off to the side and I work. And then every so often I look up and I'm like, yep, still on path. And I keep going. The reason I share all that, because that's what's happening in my brain when I'm doing my job. But for the folks that don't like heresy, Joanne's a jerk. Joanne thinks she knows everything. Joanne wants to do it all herself. Like everything you just described about, people labeling and framing you as this narcissistic asshole. Like I've had all of that pretty much thrown at me in every company I didn't build. Like any
Yeah.
company that I joined and there were other people already there, when you build it yourself, you can down select and it's great because you filter on the in. But when you join something, you've got to deal with all these people. And yeah, you get a bad rap. And what bugs people more than anything is that you don't care that you have a bad rap. They go and run to the boss and they're like, she's a jerk. And then the boss comes to you, oh, Joanne, I heard you're a jerk. And I'm like, they're just not my people. That does not get you promoted and long term. So I wonder what the difference is between like me and Greg. Greg's been at Microsoft 40 years and has innovated a lot. I made it three, got taken out by cancer, so I hung on for another two, and then I was done. So, what? Any ideas? Is there
Yeah,
another part
no.
of the brain there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, he probably has a strong sense of self-irony, which is the ability to see himself as a character in a story, right? And you find that with heretics that are able to survive in these complex environments. But
Yeah,
heretics like you are the true heretics, and I think it's really good to share this story and tell people, your experience, because I think it's first of all, it's important for people who are heretics to realize that there is going to be that social friction there. And it's important to realize, because I mean, heretics have to kind of stick together, and heretics are to a certain extent not that social, and so it's helpful, to have moments where you get to see other heretics and be like, oh, this is actually a fairly common experience. But I think it's also helpful for people who are not yet heretics, or who are encountering someone in their organization who seems a little bit obnoxious. And the thing to ask yourself is, what is that person fighting for? Is that person
Right.
just fighting for themselves? Is that person just got like kind of their own agenda and they're trying to, enrich themselves or whatever? Or is that person fighting for something other than themselves?
Yeah.
And, maybe I, outside that person, don't understand what that thing is, but I still should respect that that person is fighting for something other than themselves. They're not an obnoxious, selfish person. There's something heroic about that. And, I should, at the very least, just kind of, respect that person's courage and tenacity and not confuse what they're doing as genuinely being a kind of obnoxious or antisocial person.
Right. Well, I like that. I would appreciate that personally. I do think you tap into something, there's the different motivations. This is something we teach when we're trying to help people connect their ideas with large groups of people. You have to understand what motivates them personally, what motivates them socially, and what motivates them structurally. And at least for my flavor of heresy, it's like the structural aspect is never the money or the title or visibility or any of it. Like, I am a mission driven, I found a problem that I want to solve, and I'm going to do everything I can to solve it. And the person I look to as like the uber successful version of this is Dyson. Like, who gets obsessed with a vacuum? But for whatever reason, this man like risked his whole home livelihood. His wife was luckily a big supporter, so she went along with it and didn't leave him. But I mean, like, I think it was like 20 years of experiments before he figured it out, and like three mortgages on his home.
Oh,
Like, he got
yeah.
told no a lot.
Yeah. Well, so this is an important story to tell because his story is the same story as your Microsoft accessibility story. It's the same deep story. And I think it's important for people to understand this story because, look, when you see a heretic, what you often see is someone who you think is saying, I'm right. I'm right about this. And that's why people are always freaked out by heretics because people are always like, oh my goodness, this heretic is coming in here and telling us what we need to do. That's not how heresy starts. Heresy starts with a moment of conscience. And a moment of conscience is that's wrong. Like the way we're doing it now is wrong. So if you think about what Dyson was talking about with the vacuum cleaner, he was like morally offended by the vacuum cleaner. He was like, this is
Yeah.
just wrong. Like, I don't, why are we using this? This is just, same thing when you're talking about trying to figure out more accessible font, accessibility things. Basically, what you're saying is it's wrong for us to do it this way. And so the heretic always starts with a moment of not this is the way to do it, but this is wrong. This is
Yeah.
wrong. And then that feeling that something is wrong gives you the obligation to do research. And so that's why if you talk about biblical heretics, the moment they have this moment of conscience, they withdraw themselves from society, they read holy texts for years, they pray, they do all these kinds of things. In the case of, an engineer at a company, what your team did is they went off and talked to all these typographers and they went to all these print shops and they said, let us learn more. And so what you get after the moment of conscience is a moment of intense humility and a desire to learn and discover. And it's only when that process of discovery brings you the better answer that you then develop the fanatical sense of this is the way to do it. But the problem
Yeah.
is people only see that fanaticism, and so they think, oh my goodness, this person is a jerk. And if you're a heretic and you're trying to communicate your heresy to other people, the mistake that most heretics make is they start with this is right. They
Mm,
sit people down and they're like, look at this new vacuum cleaner, or, look at this more accessible font. And everyone else is like, where is this coming from? That vacuum cleaner looks weird. I don't understand why we need that vacuum cleaner. Instead, you need to bring them on your journey. You need to actually start with the moment of conscience and be like,
yeah.
isn't it wrong that people can't use this computer? I mean, isn't that a bad thing, and get them into that. And then once they're like, that is kind of wrong, then start to bring them, step by step into the research that you're done without presenting them with the final conclusion. And then you just kind of help them walk down the road of heresy themselves because no one likes to be told what to think. And as a heretic, your whole point anyway is you don't want to tell people what to think, You want to free them from the institution and the system that's oppressing them. And so the more that you can bring people on your own journey of heresy by slowing it down and letting them walk it step by step, the more likely you are, instead of kind of, making institutional enemies, to kind of make a few converts. Because that's the key, right? You want the converts.
Yeah. It's so the when I met my partners that started White Rhino, which is a brand strategy communications firm, but the founder of White Rhino, Dan Greenwald, is a psychologist. He put together Prochaska's stages of change with glaciers, trust levers, and created, he and Terry Sun, who's on the call, created the B to me process. And it just maps that journey. It's like you got to get people excited and nodding with you, like, yeah, you're right. Before you're like, here's what we could do about it. Let's create a vision. But what's interesting is I find it very difficult in big companies. Like, so I think, at least today, everybody can agree data centers are not great. They are big, they are loud, they are ugly, they take up a lot of land and kill a lot of biodiversity and don't do the things we want them to do and do a lot of things we don't want them to do. And even though I was hired to reimagine it, and even though we took people through this B2Me process, got them nodding, yes, yes, you're right, we need to do this. 3 years in, we had a circle of supporters, but the moment I left the building and stopped taking the arrows, it went, it
Yeah.
got shelved. It was just like, glad she's gone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I go back to that distinction between Greg and me and our experiences at the same company in radically different parts of the company. And is it just like luck of the draw of what org you're in, or is there something I could have done differently over that 3 year process? Because I'll tell you what got me. It was like we went through the intentional discovery. We got all this stuff together. Hundreds of people contributed. We went back to them, showed them how their contribution fit in. We did all the things, and still more arrow shooters came out of the woodwork. You're just
Yeah.
like, I just, by year, maybe 1 year in, I was like, I had so many arrows in my back that I was just annoyed. And then by 2 years in, I was ticked. And by 3 years in, I swear cancer saved my life because I was so like, how can you not see what's coming now? Like, we've been at this for 3 years.
Yeah.
Ah, like I
Yeah.
was like, burn the castle down,
Yes.
overthrow the king, let's go.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, it's really important to realize that when you are doing something heretical, you're challenging your organization's core narrative, the story that they're telling themselves. And it's requiring them not just to do something different around the margins, it's really requiring them to change who they are and what they're doing. And that's why it's really hard. So I think the first thing to just understand is that if heresy was easy, we wouldn't need heretics. And a lot of times the reason that a heresy succeeds is because finally the world makes everybody realize the problem that the heretic saw. So it's not that the world believes the solution, it's that the world finally sees the problem. And
Yeah.
then because the heretic has provided the solution, it gets snapped in. And so a lot of times, particularly if you're dealing with, big companies, they can go a long time doing everything wrong without getting into a crisis situation. I mean, someone like Microsoft can do all sorts of things wrong for a long period of time. So there's that. There's just a thing to realize. And I think what every heretic has to know in their soul is that if you did actually see the problem correctly, then at some point in the future, your answer is going to be implemented. It
I
is.
I say that to my teammates. I'm like, good work always finds a way forward.
Yeah.
Might
Yeah.
not be with us, might not be in the time we want it. You'll miss the early opportunities. But if it's if we did our jobs in discovery and really understood the problem and found a way forward, that will come to be in
Oh, absolutely.
some
Yeah.
formation.
And history has so many examples of this. I mean, you can find examples of this in any company. I mean, the electric car is a great example of this. That used to be heretical, and now, of course, it's ubiquitous. Van Gogh, he's a heretic, now he's ubiquitous. Tesla, he was a heretic. Now he's ubiquitous. So the first thing just to kind of understand as a heretic is that ultimately you have to understand that you have seen the future before other people. And it's not really in your power to know when the present is going to catch up to the future. And in some ways, the better a heretic you are and the further into the future you see, the longer it's going to take for people to catch up. And so you always have to comfort yourself by knowing that if the change isn't happening, that's because I'm a true visionary. I mean, you really are. If you were like a modest visionary, then the change would come 2 weeks from now, right? Because you only saw 2 weeks in the future. But if you're
Yeah.
like really seeing, and in the case of what you're talking about, the data centers, we are starting to see that happen. But even now, there's back and forth on data centers. And it's probably going to be, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years before everybody agrees with you. So, you saw a long way into the future. As far as what you can do, so one of the things we often talk about just in terms of sort of the way that the brain works is there's this thing that sort of we refer to in my lab as the anger to joy pivot. And
Okay.
so basically, your anger goes hot when you know you're right about something essentially. Because you're fighting. So, whenever you're really fighting for something and the thing you're fighting for is threatened, you start to get angry. And that anger can manifest in different ways. It can be irritation, it can be annoyance, it can be frustration, it can be vexation. But almost anyone who's been a heretic for a brief period of time has felt some version of just the rage. Just like, why is this so hard? Why is this taking so long? So on and so forth. The problem is, even though that anger in the short term like powers you and kind of drives your fight, it burns you out.
Yes, definitely.
And so if you talk to a heretic who is burnt out and who kind of left the fight, it's because they got stuck in the anger. And the anger fired the engines, drove movement, was really energizing, but then eventually took the toll on the heretic.
Yep.
And so the joy pivot comes when what you're able to do is you're able to shift from fighting the obstacle to mentally going around the obstacle to the victory. And as a heretic, you'll know that because the more you stop focusing on the irritating person who's blocking your change, and the more you focus on what the future will be like once you've made the change, you immediately feel your brain going into a joy cycle because joy is the emotion that our brain produces when we grow. And so
Mm-hmm.
when something is happening, when change is happening. And so a big part of being a heretic is learning to cycle back between the anger and the joy, because the anger in the moment is what keeps you fighting, but the joy overall is what replenishes your roots and sustains you. And so you've got to always jump between the present fight and the future victory. And as a heretic, you've got to know that future victory is coming, because if you forget that and you just get stuck in the present, burnout, endgame.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, I have so many things I would love to contribute to this because all of that, except for I will say for me, the cancer journey diffused the anger part. I'm like pure walk around it.
Yes.
I'm just like, Not you? Okay. Over here. Um, things like that just teach you real fast. Like it's not worth arguing. Like you're not going to bring people along that are in that state. So just over, under, around, just move back to joy as fast as possible.
Yeah.
I want to look and check about the questions. I see a few in here, Q&A. All right, for Angus, what extra degrees of difficulty do you find doing what you do, being a heretic, in academia, and more precisely today's academia? And are you concerned about the direction of academia?
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty exasperating time to be an academic, I'll be honest with you. I also have to say that I think, for a lot of folks, you go to college, you go to university, you maybe even become a professor because you want to be surrounded by people who are asking the big questions and doing really interesting things. And what you discover very rapidly is that the academy is an enormous bureaucracy, which is basically designed to perpetuate itself. And even the most daring, brilliant, and ambitious minds quickly lose their momentum and get sucked into this thing. We have an institution known as tenure, which is inflicted upon junior scholars, and that means that within your first 5 to 6 years as a professor, you have to prove to all of your senior colleagues that you're worth keeping around. And what that basically means is that means they take those like precious early years when you could be thinking big, challenging thoughts and instead force you to publish in all the main journals in your field. How do you publish in the main journal in your field? Not by doing something radically new. You do something that's known as a minor innovation. A minor innovation is something that looks like a big deal, but isn't. It's something that like experts think is like, wow, that's great because it doesn't challenge me, but feels new. And so we've built this entire system in the academy to essentially take those precious years and take all those interesting ideas and eliminate them. And I had the opportunity a few years ago to work with NASA. This project was dismantled due to our current administration. But when I went to work with NASA, one of the things that they were complaining about there was the same thing, which is that they would bring in all these brilliant, young, talented engineers. And it took something like an average of 10 or 12 years for these young engineers to make a significant contribution to a project
Mm.
because basically the institution had all these legacy projects that were already 98% complete. And as a young person, you just went in and kind of like twiddled things. And then by the time you got to being able to make significant contributions, you'd already become so much part of the system that you weren't capable of having new ideas. And so what we wanted to do there was build this kind of accelerator thing where young people were very aggressively encouraged to have new ideas, test them out. They were partnered on these kinds of moonshot projects with very senior engineers who could figure out how to kind of steer them through the system. So this is all to say that unfortunately, many of our institutions, not just corporations, but the academy, are just incredibly conservative with a little c, and they just
Yeah.
suppress interesting thought. And in my own case, anyone who has followed my career at all knows I'm really borderline a lunatic in terms of many of the things that I believe and I study. And I've had a very fortunate career in that every once in a while, just when it seemed like I was about to get stamped out and thrown out of the university, I had what you've called Joanna Champion come in and sort of protect me and sort of take all the arrows and then kind of move me to the next phase of my career. And so, for me, I just always say to folks, if you're a senior in an institution and you used to be a heretic and you've sort of forgotten what your heresies were because you've been in there for so long, you've kind of become part of the norm, keep your eye out for those young people and
Yeah.
protect them because that really is your gift to the system is helping those young people with the radical ideas stick around long enough for them to make the changes that you wish that you'd made when you embarked on your career.
Yeah. And there's a great parallel story in Microsoft. The current thing disrupting the world, AI, but cloud-based AI as a service, that was created by six junior employees at Microsoft, tasked by two senior employees to find a way for Microsoft to recover from missing the search and mobile markets. And they had this idea, well, all these mobile developers don't know AI, but if we know AI, if we can make AI available to them, they'll get AI from us. And that's what launched AI as a service. And this was back in like 2015 by six junior employees that Yutin Kwa just said. He was one of the seniors. He's like, I just picked them based on the attitude they showed and what they were going for.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's fascinating in the history of a company like this when you hear about like Bill Gates and stuff. A lot of it is done by these junior employees that are like, "What's the worst that could happen? I'll lose my job, and then I'll go get
Yeah.
another one." You know?
Yeah. Well,
So
I'd say this is one of the other weird things that you discover is, the corporations seem to think that the more senior you are in a corporation, the better your ideas are. I mean, that's obviously the opposite. The moment you become a parent, you realize how much cooler your kids are than you, how they see the future much more quickly than you do, that they're able to identify trends and new things. I mean, it's that young mind that of
yeah,
course has the ability to innovate, of course has the ability to do all these things. And we've created these totally like bizarre upside down structures where it's the other way around,
yeah.
where there are these dads at the top of the company who are like, I'll tell you what's going to be a great new product. It's like, I don't care, Dad. Why
I
don't you
want my
ask somebody?
analog watch back.
Yeah,
I
no,
actually
really.
do. They're great.
Wow.
Um, let's another question, and this one's from Heather. The last one was from my buddy Larry, Larry Robertson. He was our guest last month. This is from Heather. Heather produced my LinkedIn class. Heather's awesome. In this AI dominated era, many companies are expecting that their employees will shift from the worker bee to the heretic. Mm. There's an expectation that everyone should break things, invent things, reshape their role, their team, the organization, etc. What advice do you have for the many who find themselves in this situation?
Yeah, well, it's a challenging situation when your company tells you to be a heretic. Because your company doesn't really want you to be a full heretic. Your company wants
Little
you to,
heretic.
yeah, exactly. Your company wants you to give them the ideas that they wish that they thought about, essentially, as opposed to the ideas that you had thought about. So, I'm not a person you want to have, get sort of, career advice from because I'm someone who's been very lucky in his career by being very bullheaded, and just kind of doing it my way. But in general, what we know about people is that they're happier when they are living their own story. And they're less happy when they're trying to do something else for somebody else's story. And so, the thing to think about if, your company or anyone else asks you if you want to be a heretic, first of all, do you feel like being a heretic at this particular moment in your life? Is that something you want to do? If you don't, you shouldn't try and do it, because it's not right for you. If you do feel, yeah, I do want to change something, the key is to start by thinking in terms of your own conscience, to start thinking about in terms of your own anger, to start thinking about your own sense of what's wrong. Look
Yeah.
around for something that really bugs you and then say, how could I do that better? And then as long as you're focused on that, because if you feel that something's wrong, it's probably not just wrong for you, it's probably wrong for other people. The people that it's wrong for, that's your market, that's your group, that's your tribe, and start learning all you can about the problem and why it's wrong. And start developing an answer to that problem in your mind, but don't share that answer with your company yet. Instead, work on socializing the problem. Get everybody in the
Ah,
company to be like, you know what, that is a problem. That really is. It would be great if we had an answer to this problem. Keep working on your answer to the problem. Don't share it. Keep socializing the problem. The company's going to be like, you know what, this is an even bigger problem than we thought. Oh my goodness, can someone save us from this problem? Finally, at that point, when it's ready, hey, I do, I've been working on this thing, which I think it might sort of start to solve the problem. Everyone will be like, whoa, this is like 5 steps ahead of what we even thought was possible. Let's do it. And you'll find that rapid uptake in companies. And the uptake always has the same thing, which is that the company finally realizes that this problem is really serious. And then they take something off the shelf that's been sitting there for 2 years by a visionary who realized that the problem was coming. And so what I would say to you, if you really want to be a heretic, that's the way to do it, is to focus on a problem that you really believe is coming,
Hype it
socialize
up.
the problem. That's right.
Yeah. Make it real big and painful and ugly and scary for a
That's
long
right.
time.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. That reminds me of something. I was at a conference, an innovation conference, and one of the speakers was the chairman of the Patagonia board. And I kind of stalked him in the hallway because I was just like, how often am I going to be in the room with somebody like this? And my question to him was, why do you guys make movies? Like, and why is your catalog like an adventure book? And I kind of had a guess of why, but I wanted to hear like from them why. And he's like, think about it. He's like, we're $1 billion company in a world of $1 trillion companies. Think of the outsized voice we have in this world. He goes, that's why we make movies and story catalogs. He's like, we want to show people the beauty of the world in our catalogs and that there are tools that they can go out and use to explore the beauty of the world. And then in our movies, we want to expose them to the fragility and the problems and bring it into their living room or into their movie theater. And I was like, I the key for me though was we're $1 billion company in a $1 trillion world, and look how big our voice is. And I was like, you're right. Like your storytelling gives you this presence,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
a lot of companies don't have.
I love the story. By the way, I think I know that CEO because I think I met him at another conference. And what's brilliant about this is what's brilliant about the story you just told is that what Patagonia is doing is they are the heretics.
They
They've
are.
built, they've built, kind of, this gear that we can take to go out into nature, go out into the wild, rediscover ourselves, rediscover our love for nature, come back prepared to fight for nature, defend nature. And to your point, what these films are doing is they're energizing that sense of our own conscience, our own sense that there's something wrong with the way we're treating the world, but it's okay because, come with us in Patagonia. We'll get you out into nature. We'll get you to be re-energized by your encounter with the sky and the sun and the trees. And then you'll come back prepared to advocate for nature and fight for nature. And, I think anytime anyone discovers one of these stories, what they do is they give you, the person who's discovering it, the feeling that you're discovering it for the first time, even though Patagonia has engineered it for you. They've engineered the problem, they've engineered the solution, they made it easy for you. But that's exactly the kind of heretics model. I mean, that's how every real heresy works. And, whether it's, feeling a sense of, the world is a problem, or the state of our soul collectively is a problem. The heretic is there first, and once you realize the problem, the heretic's got the answer.
Yeah. Which I know we only have 3 minutes left. And this is a big, big question for you because this is what you study and write about. There's this idea that we don't actually think in data. We first respond with a story, right?
Yeah,
Like we feel it, and then we tell ourselves a story, and then everything else happens.
that's right.
And so, is this like to Heather's question and others like about how to move people and how to build your following, with you got the first torch, but you need the rest. Is it tapping into those stories? And different people are going to need different stories. Like some may want like burn the world down stories, and others may want like save the world stories. Or how do you use that mechanism that our first response is story? Is that what Patagonia is doing?
Yeah, well, I think even more fundamentally, and I think we've expressed so beautifully, is our first response is actually emotion.
Yeah.
It's actually emotion. And that's the thing that data never captures. And emotion is what makes us human.
Yeah.
And, I often, because I work a fair amount with people who, do AI and whatnot, and they're always like concerned that AI is going to take over the world or this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, no, no, AI doesn't want to do anything. It has no desires. What makes you a human is your emotions. And you know this when you check in with yourself, because if you think that you should do something, maybe you do it. But if you feel that you should do something, you almost always do. Emotion is the driver of everything. It's the driver of our behavior. It's why some things are important to you. It's what would inspire you to run into a burning building. It's what would get you to risk your career. You feel that something is right. And so the key to sparking change is to follow your emotion into what you feel is wrong, what you feel is right, and then talk honestly about that moment of encounter and
Mm.
say, this was the moment when I saw that something was wrong. Or, and people misuse story because they try and over machine it and control people with it. Because the brain thinks in story, people spend a lot of time on marketing, like, how do I manipulate my audience like a puppet? Nobody wants that. What people want is the authentic story of the moment when your heart was touched.
Yeah.
And it's very challenging for most of us to tell those stories because it involves us being very vulnerable. And you got to kind of put yourself out there, particularly if you're a heretic, because you're doing something that is dangerous and a little odd. But you got to trust your heart. So, that's the main advice that I give to people. It's disarmingly simple. It's psychologically hard for most adults. But if you think back to those moments when you just feel something is wrong or feel something is right and tell that story honestly to your audience, that will start the change. That will be the seed of everything that follows.
Ah, all right, you got to come back in like 3 months and we'll have processed all this and we'll all have told our stories or started practicing bearing our souls to the world. And then we'll teach everybody how to survive all the arrow shots. I am living proof that you can survive. It the world does go on. But thank you so much, Angus. We're at time, and this has been absolutely wonderful. And thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and heretics live forever. So don't worry about the arrows.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks everybody for joining.